Welcome to Globespan. I'm Paul Nehru, Tennessee of Guyana. Today we have on Globespan Mr. Floyd Haynes as co-host. He is the president of the Roraima Institute. He's a businessman in America and in Guyana. He is also a professor at the university, and himself and Carl Greenwich and others are on the panel for local content. Tonight, we also have with us, we're very privileged to have with us the former president of Guyana, currently the vice president of Guyana, Dr. Bharrat Jagdeo. You know what we will do tonight? We will deal with some of the frequently asked questions about the new economy that is growing in Guyana, particularly the emergence of the oil and gas sector. So we are very happy that we have Dr. Jagdeo here, and I'm going to get to it immediately because we want to use the time to the maximum because we have been following the newspapers in Guyana. The Roraima Institute had a consultant, gave us nearly 400 articles on oil, on what the newspapers are saying in Guyana, what is in the debate. Some of it is emotional, some of it is technical, some of it is not based on facts. So we are very happy tonight that we will raise these questions. My first question, Dr. Jagdeo, is, was there transparency in the approval of license and the negotiations of contracts by Guyanese governments with the oil companies, particularly Exxon?
So if I don't know how far back in history you want me to go, but when the agreement was first signed in 1999 by Janet Jackson, at that time we were not an oil-producing country. We were actively trying to get companies to come to Guyana to explore for oil and gas with very little interest. There was this talk of a potential oil and gas sector. For decades, we've had that talk, but very little spent on exploration. So in that period, an agreement was struck. The agreement is in the public domain. And today, people say it was quite liberal. But in the context of that period, and until the period when we found oil, I know how difficult it was to get people to spend money to do exploration. And when we talk exploration offshore, this runs into hundreds of millions of US dollars without any guaranteed possibility of a return. Now, that agreement was signed. Since then, we had CGX started drilling, and then you had the problem with the Surinamese gunboat. And then ExxonMobil declared force majeure for a very long period until that matter was definitively settled in 2007 by the ruling that was favorable to us and that defined the maritime boundary between Guyana and Suriname. Now, 2015, we found oil just before the PPP demitted office, or weeks before. And an agreement was signed, a production agreement was signed by the APNU government, by Raphael Trotman in 2016. Now that agreement that was signed in 2016, it was not released to the public. And it was only a year and a half after an aggressive campaign by the media, by civil society, and the People's Progressive Party that we saw the release of that contract. In addition to that, we heard about the signing bonus that the government had received. And when the Minister of Finance was asked about this, he said, we never requested nor did we receive a signing bonus. But when he said that, they already had received $18 million US and it was sitting in a bank account that is not subjected to the Auditor General's overview, nor part of the balance sheet of the central bank. In fact, it was outside of the consolidated fund, illegally there. So if you ask me about transparency, that is the only agreement that was signed. Then subsequent to that, because people confuse this, only recently, and one of the things that triggered this call for an engagement of this nature is that too many people, and a lot of my friends in the diaspora, sometimes they mix up the license with the agreement.
Correct.
So the last license was signed in 2016. That is another license, but the production sharing agreement. One was signed by Janet Jagan in 1999, and then in 2016, Raphael Trotman signed the production sharing agreement. Subjected to the conditions of that agreement, 3 licenses have been issued: LISA 1, LISA 2, and Payara. The LISA 1 and LISA 2 licenses and the environmental permits were done under APNU, and the Payara license and environmental permit was done in September under the People's Progressive Party, the new government.
Yeah.
So we released the Payara license that we signed. We made it public, it's in the public domain, and we also released the environmental permit. We then released the LISA license and the LISA environmental permit because those were not made public in the past. So if you ask me about transparency, we've been totally transparent thus far.
Okay, in your opinion, what was different or similar to the agreements, the Payara agreement that you have done under the current government with the previous government? Was there any fundamental difference and improvement?
Well, look, it's a massive document running into almost 100 pages versus if you look at it physically in terms of volume, you will see a vast difference. But there are more fundamental content differences. For example, in the environmental permit that was issued, the Payara permit, there is a prohibition of flaring and there are penalties for flaring. Okay. Significant penalties for flaring. In the LISA permits, there was no penalty for flaring, and today we are suffering from that consequence. Secondly, we strengthened the provision for monitoring and measuring the wastewater discharge. So that again, strengthening the environmental provisions. Thirdly, we got the Exxon to commit to a cradle-to-grave management of waste, which is crucial in our context. Fourthly, we enhanced the provisions and cap and stop stuff. That is, in case of a spill, that you can respond faster to that. So there are several others. We then got Exxon to commit $2 million to the government of Guyana to pay $2 million for safety audit. These are just some of the features of the Payara license and for environmental permit that were not addressed in the LISA permits. So, but I don't want to get into, because I can go into great detail. I know many people may want us to address other issues, but anyone who wants to study this matter, they can take the permits and compare them, and you will see the vast differences that are there. Now, Payara is not perfect, but it's closer to international standards than the LISA permits were. The LISA permits were an abomination. They did not address fundamental issues. So we do have much more work in perfecting these licenses. But the Payara one is closer to an international type license than anything that we had signed before. And you recall we had a short period in which to really wet our feet in this regard. ExxonMobil wanted it done by the 18th of August. They said that's the drop dead deadline. We got into office on the 2nd of August. And they said if we didn't get it done by that date, we'd lose the $6 billion, $9 billion investment. And we said, no, hold on a minute. We have to do this right. And we took a month and a half to make sure that we address this issue through a large amount of consultation. We also hired someone to review the work that was done, and we strengthened the draft fundamentally that was before us, and then issued that. So we were under enormous pressure. Nevertheless, we managed to improve the Payara license over LISA fundamentally.
Floyd, do you have any comment on what Dr. Jagdeo just said in your understanding and following of the oil sector?
No, I think he's correct in his assessment.
Okay. Well, Dr. Jagdeo and Floyd, you all are aware that the great concern is how we integrate this new sector into our national economy and how we could have a forward multiplier effect in terms of job creation and opportunities for Guyanese. Now, the current government has set up a local content. Dr. Jagdeo, when the local content legislation would be in place, and when do you think it will come into effect? Because it would be the framework within which the recommendation.
Well, first of all, this is a crucial piece of legislation. This is a crucial piece of legislation. There is no benefit in developing this sector if our people cannot share the prosperity that comes from it. And we made it clear, we in the People's Progressive Party, from the very beginning, when we were in government, but more so after we found oil and when we were in opposition, we said that Guyanese have to share the prosperity. And we made a manifesto promise that we will ensure strong local content legislation, not just a policy, but a policy underpinned by legislation. Because the oil companies want just a policy in place. And the last government said it was working on a policy. But often there is no penalty for not fulfilling a policy. The legislation will have penalties for not complying with it. So that's the first thing in terms of desire of the government. Secondly, I want to thank Floyd and all of the others who participated in the technical assessment, the group that did the consultations and came up with a great draft. They had extensive consultations, and it was Floyd. Floyd, you want to help me a bit?
Yes.
Floyd.
It was myself, Carl Greenwich, former finance minister, Carville Duncan from Labour. We had Kevin Ramnarine, former oil minister of Trinidad, Sham Nokta, environmentalist, and Tony Paul, a renowned local content and oil and gas expert.
Yes.
We were impaneled in September, and by November we had a first draft in front of the president at his desk. And by December, January, we had draft legislation. So it has moved at indeed a rapid pace. We've been successful at it. Now, I wanted to say, just a caution, we cannot just simply insist that Exxon hire Guyanese and Guyanese company without ensuring that these companies and the individuals are adequately trained and prepared. Because if we do that, and those individuals are not properly trained, it increases the cost of doing business. And that cost redounds to us as part of cost recovery. So the Guyanese taxpayer end up paying for any sort of inefficiency. So there has to be a balance, which I think the government is doing an excellent job at striking. But it's an iterative process. It's not a one-off. When I read articles in the papers about local content glitch and these, it is as if it's a one-off. You put something in place and boom. It doesn't quite work that way. It is an iterative, evolving process. It continues to evolve and it will continue to evolve. But we've made tremendous progress.
So consistent with that, when the president received the report from the committee, we have had internal discussions within the Department of Energy. They worked to try to narrow this down, the report, even further. And then there was a public consultation at which the president gave the keynote address. And there we promised that we will have additional time, maybe a month or two, not to go back to listen to the feedback that we were getting from the business community, from individuals here and in the diaspora, and that we wanted also that the investors should share their views, because we don't want to put something on paper that is totally unrealistic, as Floyd is saying, that you say you have to buy only steel made in Guyana, and we can't. It would take us 100 years, not 100 years, but maybe 5 years, even if it's feasible to produce steel to get there. But you make a requirement of that nature. So you have to be nuanced, balanced, but very tough, because the oil companies are not going to do this unless they are pushed through their own benevolence. And already we have seen the signal, because we've been so tough on saying that Guyanese have to benefit from this. Almost every company now coming to Guyana is busy scouting out local partners, because they understand that their investment would become more attractive. They have a chance of succeeding even greater if they have local partners. We've already made it clear we intend to carve out some areas exclusively for Guyanese, in which we can supply the services competitively. And for example, the rental market and all of those issues, we have made it clear. And so the local content policy is about insurance sector. It's about how we get more of their financial flows, not just about business here, but how we can channel some of the financial flows from these oil companies through the local banking system, through the local financial system that generates more breadth to our financial system. Here, it is about logistics. For example, now we have companies that are even doing that came in from abroad, are doing brokerage services for customs clearance. Things of those nature, Guyanese have been doing and can do. We can't build an FPSO, but we can do that. So as Floyd said, we have to be balanced, but we are still going to be tough. We have to make sure that Guyanese benefit from this sector.
Okay. As the promise of the oil sector is injecting a great degree of optimism in Guyana, and I was in Guyana up to 2 days ago, and I continue doing listening interviews around the country. There is a great degree of optimism. However, this optimism has to engage some broader issues of governance beyond oil. Floyd, you had a question about that and about the ethnic issue. Would you like to pose it to Dr. Jagdeo?
Yes, Dr. Jagdeo, thank you for coming on the show.
Floyd, before you go on though, on this issue of optimism, I think people are optimistic in many places because they see a government working. The last government never really worked. It was a sleepy government that didn't address a lot of policy issues that needed addressing. And so there was a free-for-all in this sector, and there was no national guidance or ownership of that sector. And so a lot of Guyanese, in spite of the wealth of the oil sector being touted by international organizations, how much wealth Guyana will get and how wealthy we will become, there was a great deal of pessimism among our people because they did not see how they themselves will benefit from the sector and how their lives would change. So I think the people are a bit more optimistic because they see us taking charge more. But we have to do a much more work for the same optimism that you may get from, say, the middle class or people in Georgetown, the business community. That has to reach the kid in Linden or in Paramakatoy or in Port Moran. There we have to do much more work in getting them to feel a part of this sector. So sorry about that, Floyd. I just wanted to talk a bit about
not a problem.
No, but that's important, the idea that it has to reach, because 80% of our people live in the rural areas and the hinterland, and a lot of people believe Guyana is Region 4. Go on, Floyd.
Yeah, that's true. Dr. Jagdeo, thank you for coming on the show. Want to switch gears a little here. It is the view of many, and indeed the view of myself, that in order for Guyana to achieve its fullest potential, there must be strong governance on the one hand and an effective opposition, and there must be collaboration between the two. There appears to be some sort of an impasse, if that's what you would call it, between the government and the opposition. What is your take on that impasse? And then I have a follow-up question.
Yes, well, I don't want to belabor the point because most people who are watching this program would have been following the evolution of the politics in Guyana for the last few years. And I think what has happened is that we took a turn for the worse. Our democracy took a turn for the worse, starting with the no confidence motion and the refusal to respect the Constitution. And it really nosedived when the last government refused to accept the results of the elections and then actually claim that it won the elections. We thought that once the president was sworn in, the recount done, the president sworn in, that we'd be able to pursue politics of engagement. Because I too share the view that Guyana cannot develop sustainably and fulfill its path, its dreams, unless all of our people benefit from it. And that's the philosophy of the party that I've come from, that I'm General Secretary of. I can say here tonight, as General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party, that is what we believe in, and that is what we'll work towards to ensure that every single Guyanese, regardless of their race or their politics, that they benefit from the impending development. So, but for engagement to take place, you have to have interlocutors who are honest interlocutors and also who can actually speak on behalf of their collective. And this is our dilemma at this point in time, that Joseph Harman and the others have taken a path of confrontation. When the entire world accepts the government as legitimate, every country in the world, the entire international community, the only group that believes the government is illegitimate and the president is illegal is APNO. And I don't believe even their supporters believe that, many of their supporters, because people are sensible. But this bunch in parliament, the leadership of the party, that is their view. How do you start off an engagement moving forward if they don't recognize, they think the president, the man that they're coming to talk to, is illegally there in that position? Now, we had a similar situation. We had problems, we filed an elections petition, but we treated the government as legitimate. We made it clear. And even though we had doubts about whether we lost the elections or not, because there's some real issues, we just accepted defeat and we moved on. We rebuilt the party and we came back into office. And so we want that engagement to take place. It is part of what we promised in our manifesto, that we would like to see changes in our governance model and in the model for managing elections. Those are two things that are explicitly mentioned in our manifesto that we will work with. But you have to have partnerships to do this. And that is the problem today. Who do we work with? And would they have stability? How long would Harman continue to squat under leadership of the PNC? Would he be displaced? Does he have the authority to command people? So that is the dilemma.
Yeah. Thank you for that response, Dr. Jagdeo. I have on this show called publicly for the opposition to recognize Dr. Ali, and I'll continue to make that call. Paul, do you have any comments pertaining to this before I ask my second question?
Well, in a liberal democratic system, which is what we have in Guyana, there is something called the official opposition. It's the alternative government. I tell you, Floyd and Dr. Jagdeo, if I had so many seats in parliament, life would have been wonderful because you could project yourself as the alternative government. Look how many seats they have with policies and so forth. You only go out of the parliament to protest when there is no democratic, free and fair elections, when you don't have seats in parliament and where you have committees in the parliament where you could participate and so forth. Yeah. So I think there has to be a rethinking. I have been following what's happening in the opposition, and the unfortunate thing is that they have too many leaders with what I call chiefs without followers, and they are on different pages. The other day I read, to my surprise, that a very prominent person in the opposition said that the solution to Guyana is a two-state solution or a three-state solution. How could you be talking about partition at this point in time? Anyhow, I think there is a lot of work that civil society has to do to engage the opposition in order to probably assist them to find their feet within the system.
But you know how hard it is. We're policy government. We like to engage in policies and debate on those issues. There is absolutely none of that now. We can't get a reasoned feedback from the opposition. In parliament, where the debate should be around policies like budgetary policies, foreign policy, etc. Everything comes back to race. There's not a single issue in Guyana that you can be talking about something his toe in Berbice, and they would find, the creative minds there would find a way to bring it back to the race issue. And that is very, very debilitating for the country. We can't move forward as a people. It harms a lot of people who want to engage. So that's a big problem that we have today. And something else that I wanted to say, because if we cannot engage in a reasonable way with the leadership of the party, does it mean that the PPP will exclude? Are we not going to engage at all with the constituency of that party, the constituents? And the answer is no. We plan an aggressive engagement with people in their communities, bypassing their leaders if the leaders are harming development of those communities and individuals. Because we want the kids who support APNUTU, our PNC, we want them getting the same opportunities for scholarships and education and jobs as any other kid in Guyana.
Floyd, you have another
yeah,
question on
follow-up question. This is a good segue to that question. Dr. Jagdeo, it's fair to say I know you, I know Dr. Ali, His Excellency. We have talked extensively on the issue of race in Guyana. But for the record, how do you respond to the charges that since this government has been elected, they have unleashed a campaign of vindictiveness and marginalization of Afro-Guyanese? Some has even gone as far as to label it as ethnic cleansing. So those charges, Dr. Jagdeo, how do you respond?
So again, these charges are made from this group of people, some who have never changed over the several years. That's all they live in that domain of racism. And then some people are using the charge of racism to cover up the corruption. Now, when we talk about corruption, we're not saying Afro-Guyanese are corrupt. Afro-Guyanese and Indo-Guyanese, any race can be corrupt. That's the first thing. Any race can be incompetent. Just like how when we say that the APNU is incompetent, the cabinet, it doesn't mean we're talking about the competency of Afro-Guyanese, because you have some of the brightest people in Guyana are Afro-Guyanese, and in that party too. So these are crucial issues. But coming back to these charges that they are making. Now, before the elections or before the 2nd of August, I remember several people, including people who now, like Mr. Haynes, saying to me that if you don't go after these people, you're going to lose support, what they're putting our country through. That is Roxanne Myers, Mingo, and Lowenfield. Now, every single person knows that they've committed illegalities. It just happens that they're Afro-Guyanese, it happens, this case. But these are people that we all fought against their illegality. Indo-Guyanese and many Afro-Guyanese said that they were the Caribbean Court of Justice, pointed out that this guy was acting like a lone ranger. They hid the statements of both. Criminal behavior. This is not an indictment of Afro-Guyanese. It is against those who committed election fraud. And if there are Indo-Guyanese who are in that too, they too should face the consequences. So in the future, nobody will ever again want to do that when they face the consequences. This is the issue. Secondly, on the other issues, you've seen some people being charged. Now, they would never say anything when the government just sued BK to recover work that we believe was sold way below the value. 20-something million US dollars sold for maybe less than 500,000. So we sued him. We sued Larry Singh. We sued the other guy, Maharaj. But nobody says anything because, but if you only go after an Afro-Guyanese who happens to not to support no Afro-Guyanese in Guyana, because I don't think they shared any of these guys on either side, the Indo-Guyanese or the Afro-Guyanese share their loot with the masses. But if you go after them, it becomes racism. Now, let me give you the specifics. The guy, President Granger, never gave Trevor Ben the authority to sell lands. He never gave him the authority. That authority has to be gazetted. He did not give it. This guy sold at a number of plots to people way below their value. So apart from just the value, he committed an illegal act. They should be condemning him. Now they're protesting that it's victimization. They should, President Granger and the others, APNU should say, we're shocked that he did this. He had no authority to do this. The party did not approve this. Our government did not approve this. But now he becomes a victim of the People's Progressive Party. So I suspect that if we don't do anything, we don't go after all the guys who transfer large amounts of land. We took back land from almost everybody on the East Ogre. Indo-Guyanese, Afro-Guyanese, everyone. We made that pledge before the elections. We did not say after the elections. Before the elections, I said, lands and survey, NISIL, we know the illegal transaction, we're coming after them. Now, when we go after them, it's discrimination and marginalization and victimization. But Floyd, if we forget all of these things, all the illegalities, and allow these people, the ones to go with the loot, they will find some other reason to shout victimization or discrimination. That will not stop it. Now, who are the people? The most racist government ever has been APNU. Just look at the facts today. They fired 1,972 Amerindians as soon as they got into office. 1,972. The biggest act of discrimination and block against indigenous people in this hemisphere, I would say for the last 30 years. Because when you consider the size of the population, nobody said anything. The sugar industry, everybody knew, they were advised against it, against closing sugar. They did it largely. Ramjatan said in Parliament, those people, the Indian people, and he used a disparaging word, don't vote for us. This is it. When look at the composition of the public service, how is it that they're claiming that you cannot have Afro-Guyanese in the public service? Afro-Guyanese predominated under the PPP 23 years in office. The majority of the public servants were Afro-Guyanese in the teaching profession, in the medical area, in public service, in the army, in the police. 23 years of PPP. Under the PPP, you had head the police, and even now, the head of the army and the head of the police are Afro-Guyanese. The chancellor and the chief justice are Afro-Guyanese. Compare that with APNU. You had the head of the police, everybody there were Afro-Guyanese. There's not a single Indo-Guyanese in the three branches of the government. And they talk about racism. If you need affirmative action if you're talking about not that I support it, but Indo-Guyanese probably and Amerindians, you need to have affirmative action for them in the public sector because they're underrepresented. And then this group, in an attempt to paint the PPP as racist, talks about, Afro-Guyanese cannot find a place in the public service. Of the permanent secretaries that the APNU had, not a single Indo-Guyanese. We look at the composition now of permanent secretary. Look at the ones we had. It reflects Guyana. This is the people who are the most racist, who thrive on racism. They have this self-righteous way of accusing others of racism. That is what is happening. And they've gotten away with it for a very long time because people in Guyana like to tiptoe around these issues. So I'm extremely glad that you brought it up, Floyd, because we need to debate this issue factually. Like once I said, why don't we have a factual debate about which period Afro-Guyanese fared better in Guyanese history, in its modern history, post-independence. And let's look at the period from 1966 to 1992, 92 to 2015, and then 2015 to 2020. And I will take your wager that you had more black-owned businesses started in the period under the PPP. You had more ownership of land, more ownership of vehicles, on every single parameter. We, under the People's Progressive Party, and if we do a fact-based debate, you will see that is so. So we have to start confronting this issue, but notwithstanding all that I'm saying here, we do suffer from these charges because when you reach out to the communities, when you go to a community and people are primed by saying, oh, the guy who's coming is racist, he's discriminating against everybody, then it sets up a kind of suspicion in the villages and the communities when you want to engage young people. And it does harm them. They're reluctant to engage. They're reluctant to explore the opportunity. I want young Afro-Guyanese kids to see this as their government too. They must explore every scholarship option, every job option. They might not get all of it because it's limited and it's competitive. But at least that's how they see, they engage, they want to grow wealthy, they want to engage, to start a small business, seek out help. That is what we need. But the environment is great.
Paul, do you want to comment?
Yeah, well, I always thought that I never could have understood how APNU was so politically unwise. The Amerindians hold a very important balance in the politics. And for you to go and fire nearly 2,000 of them, not 100, not 200, but nearly 2,000. I said once in a program, it was equivalent to when they took over Iraq and they fired all the military in Saddam Hussein. And that ended up with the ISIS. And they paid a political price for that. If you have 2,000 Amerindians employed for whatever purpose they were employed, and you fired them, do you understand what I'm saying? The impact. So I could not understand what that was about. The other comment I'd like to make is, I teach government and political corruption, and I monitor this idea of when people are in political office, they gave the elite through deals a lot of land. Now, if the APNU or those very guys who gave a few people hundreds of acres of land had taken those acres of land and they divided it up into house lots and give it to Afro-Guyanese, then Afro-Guyanese would have about 50,000. So, house lots. So it's both a class issue and also perhaps a race issue, but it's definitely also a class issue.
I think what is not being told is that a lot of Indians benefited under APNU.
Exactly.
A lot of the individuals that benefited, particularly from large-scale contracts, are Indians, have been Indians, Indo-Guyanese, under APNU. And I think that's one of their better-kept secrets. But it's no secret. It's out there. So I often...
When they need the votes, they go to the Afro-Guyanese and say, we represent your interests. When they are in office, that we pointed this out, that several of the largest, in fact, at one time I looked at about $40 billion in contracts were given out to about 4 or 5 Indo-Guyanese. So they do have, but these were elitist guys who were close to them and in bed with them. And so it's a very convenient thing to cry racism now on how you represent Afro-Guyanese.
I think they definitely, this has been going on for too long, and we really need a continuous and in-depth conversation about the race issue. We cannot continue to allow this race issue to impede good governance in Guyana. And the point is made, we can't fill the heads of young people with stereotypes and so forth to impede them from accessing opportunities. And young Guyanese, whether Afro-Indo, that I have been meeting over the last 4 years, they are thinking outside of the traditional race box. And somehow the current government has to continue to make extraordinary efforts to reach out to them in small business, in entrepreneurship, financial literacy, and these sort of things, so that they could feel included, the concept of inclusivity. It's 7:45 and we have to go for a break. And when we come back, we will go back to the subject of oil and gas.
AllFromOneSupplier.com is promoting Gaisuku sugar as a way to support Guyana sugar industry. Purchase your Gaisuku sugar from AllFromOneSupplier.com along with your West Indian and American groceries. Purchasing Gaisuku sugar is a good fate gesture to help restore the sugar industry. AllFromOneSupplier.com has free shipping and delivery, and we ship to all states and free deliveries in New York. Log on to allfromonesupplier.com or call 718-551-3292. That's allfromonesupplier.com or 718-551-3292. All From One Supplier carries all your curry powders, from chief to indie. We also carry all pepper sauces, such as Dave's pepper sauce, Bertie's pepper sauce, and Matuke's, and many more. So order online today at allfromonesupplier.com with free shipping within the United States. Allfromonesupplier.com. Travel Caribbean, and JetBlue. So let Travelspan compare all airlines and offer you the best fare. Call Travelspan at 718-845-0437 for the lowest deals between New York, Miami, and Guyana. That's Travelspan at 718-845-0437. Call Travelspan in New York at 718-845-0437. Georgetown at 227-1701. Or Berbice at 337-4287. In New York, 718-845-0437, Georgetown 227-1701, or Berbice 337-4287, and West Coast Demerara at 269-0140. Let Travelspan book you the best deals for you and your families.
Welcome back. Welcome back to Globespan. We are in a conversation with Dr. Jagdeo, the current Vice President of Guyana and the former President of Guyana. And with me is my co-host, Floyd Haynes, who is currently in Guyana, a businessman who is investing in Guyana. And that's wonderful. An example of Guyanese abroad should go back to it. That's what Floyd and I do when we're in Guyana. We just drink juice, all the juices. Dr. Jagdeo, it was reported recently in the Chronicle, and I will quote because I need your comment on this. Along with the earnings from the oil lifts and over 21 million US in royalties and interest, Guyana has close to $267,668,706 in a natural resource fund at the Federal Reserve Bank. Please explain to Guyanese why this arrangement exists and why, and how and when will the government of Guyana access these funds?
So first of all, there is a prevailing economic philosophy, as you know, that you have to save some of the money that you get from a windfall, a resource windfall for intergenerational equity, and that you have to be very cautious in how you allow inflows into an economy, particularly the size of ours, without changing relative prices, the so-called Dutch disease.
Yes.
And so this is consistent with that philosophy. A sovereign wealth fund was put in place. Now, we do have concerns about the model that is currently in place, Natural Resources Fund. Apart from the fact that we don't believe it's arm's length enough from the government and can be subjected to control of the minister, almost total control, who determines the fiscally sustainable sum. He would set up the investment committee, controls the central bank. The minister dominates the fund, and when it should be a bit more technically managed so that you don't have political interference on it in its use. And that is why so many people like the Norwegian model, because it emphasizes this independence from the government. So the fund is in place. It was enacted in the period after the no confidence vote. You're having some trouble with your phone, turning it off.
Here,
I'll
Tennessee.
give you a minute, Paul, to turn off your phone.
Yeah, this phone.
Turn it off.
It's a technology, Paul.
Yeah, the technology is a pain in the neck. Sometimes it is. I'm trying to get the phone off, it wouldn't go. That person who's calling me is very persistent. They probably won't want me to ask questions, but anyhow, I have enough questions. Sorry
So
for that.
saying that
Please.
maybe it was
Tennessee, you either have to turn it off or throw it in the next room.
Yeah,
you
but
can
the
put it on silent too. You don't have to turn it off totally.
and it's still do it. And somebody, Candace, told me to take the ringer off. Okay,
Yes. All right.
that's
So,
some.
so the Natural Resource Fund. So it was enacted in the period after the no confidence motion was successful. So we made it clear that we will repeal this or amend it to reflect our view that the fund should be managed sustainably and at arm's length from the government. And we that is part of our manifesto promise. Now, when we are going to utilize, so all the money so far from the sale of oil and from the royalties have gone into the fund. So as soon as we have not used any money since we got into office from there, there may be need to use the resources in the near future, but when we do so, it will be transparently transferred into the consolidated fund, and it will be debated in Parliament. The projects for which the money is used will be debated in Parliament. So we are working now to amend or to change the legislation, the fund, and then whenever there is a budgetary gap or there is a project that needs funding, that we make a decision that we have to access the funds, we will do so transparently. Now, there is a formula there about how money should be transferred to government, but I think the formula is archaic. I think, Floyd, we spoke a bit about this, that we can't be saving too much for intergenerational equity now when we have so many pressing needs. We still have people who are poor, who need a place to live in, who don't have good potable water, who need better quality health care, where we have to get education to world-class levels. We need to invest our money in these areas too, as well as in other sectors of our economy. So when the oil is gone, we still have a booming economy, unlike other countries.
Okay. Floyd, you have any follow-up to that, or we move forward?
No, I think we move forward.
Okay. Now, Exxon is reordering its priorities for investments at a global level, and Guyana is on the top of the list. Exxon is a powerful global company with technical know-how and staff. How will Guyana effectively represent our interests, considering that this is a new sector for us and the early stages of developing Team Guyana to bat with this global corporation?
So first of all, you're absolutely right that Guyana is in the front line of Exxon's interests. And this is largely because of the success in Guyana, first of all. They've had 80% success rate, which is very rare. They've had 18 discoveries, and all very, very rapid discoveries. Secondly, the quality of our crude is the top quality. It's light sweet crude. And thirdly, we have a low break-even cost compared to relatively, and compared to many other locations that you're involved in. So that is why we will see a continued presence and aggression on the part of Exxon and the others to shift more their operations into Guyana. And so even globally, if there's a reduction in demand for oil and gas resources or fossil fuel, I believe because of those characteristics of our crude that I mentioned and also the low cost here, that we will continue for a little bit longer than normal in producing here in Guyana. Now, you're absolutely right that these are major companies and they have enormous capability. And we have been in a mad scramble to just keep up because the pace of change in Guyana is so rapid and the infrastructure needed to manage this change is non-existent. APNU never worked on it. And they needed to do that from the time we knew that the first FPSO was being built. And so now there is a mad rush to address the policy issues, local content, the amendment of the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act, which was passed in 1986, the establishment of a petroleum commission. All of these issues are issues of institutional capacity, building that, whilst at the same time ensuring that we don't delay the investments, because every day there are mundane issues, real-time issues that you have to address, which take up a lot of the technical staff time, because if they don't fix the permit now, etc., we lose investment, people lose money, etc. So it's a big struggle between the two. And the only way we resolve that is by building the capacity. So even now, we're working on the new structure for the energy agency that will manage the sector. We'll have to recruit people in aggressively from next week. Hopefully, you'll start seeing maybe 6 ads in the newspapers so that we can start managing the sector better. For example, let me give you an example. Exxon runs ahead with some projects. The only time we have a say, and Exxon is the operator, is when the cost for the project are audited. We haven't even started some of those audits again. We're going out to tender from 2017 to 2020 now, because only up to 2017 costs have been audited. But you can then only, it's done in a post-investment. So you don't have a say. The investment has been made and you can only fight over the cost, whether it's recoverable from cost oil. But we are building a capability now to say, before the project, we don't agree with this because we're spending half of our money, we're paying for half of it. So if they're building a headquarter, I thought was 80 million. Now I see it's $150 million. Now I can understand, building a good capability on shore for like an operation center and all of that. But that is like nearly three times the Marriott, three Marriotts. And it can, and we are paying for this. So we need to know, is this what really based on international standards? If you're going to have 300 staff and spend 150 million, or you want a Rolls Royce, when we can deal with just a Toyota at this point in time, because every cent that's spent there is less money coming to the government. So these capabilities have to be built early. For example, there is a request now for proposal for new shore base. And many people are coming to us and saying that the parameters are all out of whack with international parameters. And secondly, it seems designed to give, a few people the work. So we need to build those capabilities. That's when you get into proactive management. Right now, and I'll be frank with you, we are still at this stage where we are chasing issues down and trying to fix them as we go, whilst we're trying to work on the reforms parallel. Because we have had a short period in government, in 6 months or so, we have had to do 2 budgets, a lot of things, telecom reform, a whole range of issues, moving them forward. So there's a heavy overload now, but we are committed to building that capability. You're absolutely right that they have a great number of people and capacity in their side, and we have to build a similar capacity to be able to represent Guyana's interests and interface with them productively.
I know it's not an easy challenge because I have studied thoroughly the Venezuelan oil industry. I wrote a book on the oil industry and about nationalization in Venezuela. And I followed with great detailed care on how Venezuelan technocracy in oil evolved over the years and the contribution they made to OPEC, because even OPEC in the early days did not manage the knowledge and the technology. So it is a process, as Floyd says. These kind of things are not happening overnight.
No.
But we have to keep at it, and there's no doubt that the current government, when I was doing the listening interviews recently, they're energized and they are working with all the burners. And I know it's not easy to, in a country with limited human resources. Most of our educated people, at least at tertiary level, are abroad, and it's not easy. It's not easy. But Dr. Jagdeo, the world is moving away from fossil fuels into renewable energy. Is the current government investing or anticipate to invest in renewable energy?
As a follow-up to that, Paul, let me just...
Go ahead, Floyd.
As a follow-up, and I think both of these questions can go together.
Yes.
There is a general concern, or several concerns by all of the experts, about the impact of the development of oil on the environment. Some have even argued that we should just leave the thing in the ground and get money for it. A lady came to Washington, D.C., and Paul, you and I were at a forum, and she just went on and on about why we should just leave the oil in the ground. And what was curious to know, what are your thoughts on that, oil and the environment, and Paul's question as well?
So right now, the world is still using fossil fuel, and it's being produced in many parts of the world. We're in the and by companies and large companies, mainly from developed world, and at costs that are higher than in producing in Guyana, and secondly, more polluting because heavy oil with a lot of sulfur, etc. So this is why we believe that this resource has to be utilized in a careful way, but swiftly. The window for oil and gas or fossil fuel is rapidly closing, and it will get even more difficult as we move forward because of the Biden administration now, its commitment to the Paris Agreement and to move irreversibly to incentivize the production of renewable. And once the private sector gets that signal, I think the investments will come in at the scale necessary to accelerate the production of non-polluting forms of energy. So the window is narrow and it will get narrower. That is why when people say we don't have a depletion policy, Glenlal and the Kaichor News, I say yes, we do have a depletion policy. Our depletion policy, and it sounds a bit crude, is to get as much of the oil as possible out of the ground before you have the window closed totally on fossil fuel. And the oil that comes out of the ground, if it has externalities, then it must pay for those externalities where it's used. So that is why we support, although we would be an oil-producing country, we support a tax or a carbon tax or a cap-and-trade system, that wherever the oil is used, because we use very little of it here, and the resources that we get from the oil and gas sector must be utilized to lift our living standards and the prospects of our people moving to greater prosperity by reinvesting in other sectors, non-polluting sectors, the traditional sectors, agriculture, the sale of ecosystem services, a whole range of other things. Whilst we have this window, because many of the countries use money from polluting sectors to do the first industrialization, to lift themselves up. So why should we be any different? But we are saying, you tax the externality. If you want to put a carbon tax in the US and that's where the bulk of the oil is being used, then feel free to do so. It makes oil a bit more attractive, but don't tell us to leave it in the ground when everyone else is taking it out. And the thing with carbon is that if a ton is emitted in China or India or the United States or in Germany, it has the same impact on the environment as a ton emitted here. We can be saving the world, having a great, the best environmental policy in the world when everyone is busy churning out fossil fuel. This has to be a global goal. So notwithstanding that, so that's how we see that sector. But parallel to that, we are now moving aggressively on solar. We have $85 million US sitting in the Inter-American Development Bank, money that we got from the sale of forest carbon that we pioneered, the PVP pioneered. It's been sitting there since I left office as president. We intend to use those for solar systems for Linden, for Essequibo that are not connected with the grid. We're going to restart the hydro power, and we're going to build the hydropower. Gas will be cheaper energy and less polluting than the fossil, the diesel or bunker C. So even that in that sector, although it's not totally renewable, it would emit less carbon, or CO2 equivalent. So this is how we see through an energy mix of that nature. And then on the other hand, exploring, keeping our forests intact. Our forest is a carbon sink. So even with our increase in maybe moving from 2 tons per capita to say 5 or 7, 6 tons per capita or 10 tons per capita, we'd still be below some of the other developed world, where it's 20 tons and stuff like that. And we would be a carbon neutral country because our forests act as a sink to extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So I believe we can still keep our green credentials. We can expand the LCDS, which we plan to do, into the blue economy, into biodiversity issues, water management, sale of ecosystem services. We can keep our green credentials intact and still produce oil and gas.
Well, it's very, the most important thing I think is that listening to you is that the leadership of the current government is not only aware, but is thinking through in depth all the implications of the future with regarding renewable energy. You know, I recall that I met you once in South Africa, in Johannesburg, when I was representing Labour at a United Nations conference on the environment. And you also, in 2010, got the Champion of the Earth Award and when you initiated the low carbon development strategy. Now that in those days you were very aware and conscious of these issues, what did you learn from that experience that is informing you and the government of Guyana now in the development of the oil and gas sector?
Well, first of all, Paul, we've indicated in that you recall when we launched the low carbon development strategy. First of all, today, now they're recommending in the global environmental movement, they're pushing countries to do low carbon development strategy. We launched ours 10 years ago. Secondly, when we had this pro bono study from McKinsey and Company, and we came up with our strategy. We calculated what it would take in an annuity to offset the deforestation or to outcompete deforestation. We calculated it and we went around and marketed this. And when we signed that agreement with Norway, people were saying it's a dream, it's a pipe dream. Well, it happened. And then when it happened, Ramjatan and the Trotman and the others wrote a letter to Norway to say don't release the money. And the irony of it is that some of this money was spent by APNU, the very same money with Cathy Hughes and the others, to go and put internet sites around the country, etc. So what it is was we had a global presence on the environmental sector. We lost that because the country went ahead with its Green State strategy, but with no theoretical underpinning of it or projects and programs to implement it. For example, they went to the Paris Club and made a pledge to have 100% renewable by 2025. And they didn't have, you know that point, and we don't have a single project to achieve it. Now, we're the only country that would have to go to the Paris Club pledging conferences now. When we go to Glasgow and say, sorry, we have to lower our ambition now. Every country will be raising ambition and we have to lower our ambition, make us look like fools. So we lost a lot of momentum. We want to build back that momentum because it's an important sector. We believe from the environmental sector, we can earn upwards of $500 million per year, upwards of that. Just as much as we're earning now, more than we earned last year for oil and gas sector, and we earn this year from oil and gas. We can earn per annum more from the environmental sector because of our assets, and then deploy these in the best interest of our country. So when we launched the LCDS, it was more of a development strategy. We set out to see how we can achieve the same level of prosperity as the developed world without using the same path to that prosperity, the polluting path. But we made it clear, our people want the same level of prosperity. We're not going to be locked into a model that keeps us, substandard, and where our people can dream the big dreams too. That is why it's not purely an environmental strategy. Many people think it's just environment. It's not. It's more of an economic strategy.
Paul, let me ask, the gas to shore pipeline has come in for a lot of criticisms. People have said it's not been that the study, there has been no study. The whole approach to it has not been transparent, and they even suggested that the choice of whales was ill-advised. It wasn't well thought out. What say you, sir?
Yes. So first of all, it's a very difficult thing to operate in an environment where you have such a great deal of ignorance from people who are in the newspapers every single day. So we've explained this. These questions were posed to me at the press conference. And I said, look, in 2016, this decision should have been made. Exxon had done a technical feasibility. So it's technically feasible. You can find engineering solutions for it. Now, the financial feasibility is a no-brainer for anybody who has a modicum of sense, a tiny bit, even a residual brain, a little bit of a brain, would understand that if you are now generating power at 12, 13 cents per kilowatt hour, with the current price of fossil fuel, one time it was 20 cents per kilowatt hour. You're selling power at 30 cents per kilowatt hour. That if you can have power supplied at 7, 8 cents per kilowatt hour, then a madman would make the decision to do so. And that is what this opportunity offers us, to cut the cost of generation by 50% from its current level. And this leaving out the possibility of escalation of fuel. In 2012, it was 20 cents. What else do you need if you can get power at half the price at which you're generating? That would allow us to cut the cost that you sell it at probably half. If you can have power at 15 cents per kilowatt hour, which is still very high, but rather than 30 cents per kilowatt hour, do you know how it will change the lives of people and the business community here? Projects that are not viable now because of power costs will become viable. New industries will open up here, a whole range of stuff. So on the financial feasibility, it's a no-brainer. For Christ's sake, you just have to think it through for a couple of minutes. And that is what we're aiming for with the pipeline and the price of the gas, even if you include that, and the repayment of the pipeline. It would work out to about 7 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour, which is way below at what we're generating, and even cheaper than the Amila at that time. So that's on the financial feasibility. Then location, Floyd. So as I said before, after 2016, suddenly Patterson is starring again. He has all these wonderful ideas about what to do. But he had a decision since 2016 to make, and guess what they did? They did not make the decision because there was a study done that showed that in Mahaika, that's the ideal location to take a deep water facility. The study was done by the IDB. And instead of making this decision, they're busy acquiring lands in those areas and hoping to get the pipeline to terminate there too. It had nothing to do with national interest. So guess what happened? We got into office and there were a couple of routes, particularly here in Georgetown and the East Bank, the Ogle East Coast area and the East Bank. We made a conscious decision not to locate the power plant in Region 4. They terminate the pipeline because the cost of land here is very valuable and it's highly urbanized. And to bring the polluting industries this close to the city and to settlements, established settlements, that whole corridor would develop commercially from the Enmore all the way to Diamond or so. So if you put all of these facilities, you need 2,000 acres of land here. You take it out of housing, but you're putting an industrial area smack in the middle of the city and the suburb. So we said, based on the cost of land, so there are two other alternatives. Berbice, the Crab Island, and Wales. Now, Wales is not a PPP area. Well, it might be PPP, but it's a mixed area. And so what if you locate the power plant here? You're still transmitting the power back to Georgetown. It's not, the power plant and the gas is being located here. And people, if you're talking about employment, we're building a fixed bridge where you'll be on a highway that will take you from Region 4 into Wales in about 20, 30 minutes. You can drive there if you have to work. It's not like very far. So the Wales thing there, Wales PPP, as though PPP areas should not get any development too. As though, they should be excluded from everything. But it wasn't because of PPP. They closed down, they shut down the sugar estate, deprived 2,000 people of jobs, and we had the land there. And the land is still relatively cheap over there. So that is why when they compare Crab Island and there, Crab Island is more suited for refinery and shore base and wharves and stuff. And we decided to put the power plant there, plus the industries that were driven out. You remember the EPA, they were trying to put some chemical plants on the East Bank, and people protested.
Yes,
well, a lot of those the storage facilities can go to the Wales and be safe over there too, because it's far from the settlements and stuff. So it's carefully thought out. Now, what we can defend our decision. It's not going on nobody's private land. It's all state land over there. We asked the people to study it. They said it's technically feasible. Let's go with it. And we made the decision to go. And right now they are laying out that estate, the area to do some agriculture, housing, the power, subsidiary, a whole range of other industries. So will become a big development area too.
We missed one of our breaks, so we'll continue and conclude the program. But definitely, Dr. Jagdeo, you have demonstrated, well, like in the past, but you really work hard. You are knowledgeable about the economy of Guyana, and you have acquired a grasp for the gas and the oil and gas sector very quickly in Guyana, and that is very comforting to know, Floyd.
Yes, absolutely.
You articulate. It's very clear that you work very hard and study very hard these issues. I don't know how you do it. You have a lot of energy. Probably you have a secret. You must tell Floyd and I what it is.
But what I would urge people in the diaspora, etc., because I had some encounters where people share these Skyshore news stories. So one guy, he says he's a specialist abroad, and he says, oh, the Guyana collected all this money and they're not telling us where the money, no information on the money. So the money, as you just pointed out, it's sitting in a bank, the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. And the sum is known to everybody. It's in the newspapers, but he says it's not done. Another guy I saw in a WhatsApp group that they have there saying things like, "Oh, the PPP did not release the PSA that it signed. We did not sign a PSA since we got in, and the PIARA license that we signed, we made it public." Then suddenly Vincent Adams has become now, the leading advocate for change. He was there when LISA 2 permit, he was in charge of the EPA when the LISA 2 permit was issued, environmental permit. Why didn't he address all of those issues? We had to do it under the PIARA, all of the issues that I spoke of earlier, but suddenly he's the most enlightened person on the environmental matters. You are partisan too. And so this is it. I hope people would read a bit more and don't listen to the propaganda. Kaichor News is, no, they've done a lot of writing on this sector, and some of it is good. The reporters have done some really good journalism. But then you have some weird stories in there appearing that have no factual basis, as though they're written by mad people. And then people keep sharing this around, and it's hard for policymakers. It's very hard because it has no basis in fact. And then it creates a wrong impression of the industry. So I want to urge my colleagues in the diaspora to seek more answers, about these issues, not to just share these things around when many of them are not factual.
Well, the Roraima Institute, we contracted a consultant, and we got about 3 years of all the articles published on oil in all the newspapers, and we intend to continue doing it, to do a content analysis, to separate fact from fiction, to see what's technical and what's not technical. And we're making this information available to the public so they themselves can do that, because we believe oil literacy education is very important. It's a new sector. It's not like sugar or rice that we knew since the days of slavery and so forth. So as we leave this program, I'm very happy that it has been a very highly educational program tonight about Guyana. Floyd, would you like to make a comment before we are about to depart?
I just want to thank Dr. Jagdeo for coming on the show and illuminating on some of the more salient points as it relates to the oil and gas, and as well as dealing somewhat with what I refer to as the elephant in the room, the issue of race. In parting, I would like to see the government do something to engage the diaspora in a more meaningful way. I do think that the diaspora has a lot to offer Guyana, and Guyana can benefit from some of the talent that resides outside. So that's something I'd like to see being pushed and given serious attention. But thank you for coming on the show, Dr. Jagdeo.
Oh, you're welcome.
And Dr. Jagdeo, what last thoughts or reflection or wisdom you have for Guyanese at home and abroad regarding how we move forward in our country?
Yes. Well, I agree with Floyd about the engagement of the diaspora. We just hired a director in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There's a desk, there's a strategy to reach out more to the diaspora. Unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 situation that world is struggling with, there can be very little person-to-person contact, because by now we haven't traveled much, but we'd like to have the face-to-face engagements where if we come to Brooklyn or Queens or so, have a meeting of this nature, people can ask you questions, they can interrogate you, that sort of thing, or in Toronto or wherever people or Guyanese are. And that will change once we get out of this pandemic. It will change that you have more of this engagement. You have a lot of people who have great talent, and we're trying to create the opportunity. When we say local content, it doesn't mean for people only who live here, for the Guyanese all around the world. Because once you're Guyanese, even if you have a tiny drop of Guyanese blood from your great-grand and something like that, you are part of that local content policy. And so we are working to create a framework. So if they have companies or skills, that they become much more marketable in the industry here. We can't hire all of them in the public sector, but we are hoping to create the environment in which they can capitalize on the growth in these areas. So this is very important for us. Floyd and I have had many discussions on various issues, and unfortunately, these sorts of programs, you can't really go in depth about the things that are needed policy-wise, like financial deepening in the country and how we can engage people. There are lots of things policy-wise that we have to work on. But just to say thank you very much for having me on the program. I hope in a way we can't answer all the questions. I know you had a few more questions, but that people will take some time now. If they see an article, they have to think things through a little bit more. I'm hoping that we can stimulate more discussion around these areas, and people understand why, for example, we are not, we haven't renegotiated the contract as yet, but how are we going to fix this in the future through a model PSA? What we are working on, what would be the elements of that new PSA? How we'll change the fiscal incentive regime to suit Guyanese more? How we'll safeguard ourselves by ring fencing? So what happens now, like Exxon using all these resources for aggressive exploration finance from the starboard block? A lot of these things can come out through future discussion. But thank you very much. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you very much. And as we close the program, I'd just like to say that in the global south, oil-producing countries have a dismal record in using the enormous oil revenues for the transformation of their economies and society to provide their populations with sustainable livelihoods. I am going to be optimistic, and we are hoping that the current administration in Guyana will make a difference and will be an exception to that rule that we have seen around the world. And I believe it can happen. I believe it can happen, and we all have to pull together. And I'm hoping that the opposition in Guyana will assume their responsibility as the alternative government in the parliament and begin to work together so that we can be an exception to what has happened around the world, where the oil wealth has not been able to transform the societies they belong to. So once more for Globespan, thank you all for listening, and we look forward to our next program.
Thanks.